Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another session of Movement Meditations. Hope you're doing good this morning. Just double checking that that's all gone live. Yeah, perfect. Great. So how is everyone? Hope you're doing all right. God, what day is it? Thursday. Happy Thursday. Today's lesson, we've got quite a lot to do, so I'm going to jump into it relatively quickly. But this week we've been focusing on kind of the organization of the face, how, I don't know, we can kind of learn about how we present ourselves and how effective and affective the muscles of the face are when you work to reduce tension. You know, the facial muscles are directly related to our emotional state. And when you work with those parts of you, you can affect your emotional state. So I think it's a really nice thing to have as part of a daily maintenance or weekly maintenance or whatever, just to consider the feeling that we have in our face. But today's lesson is going to be a bit different. It's going to be an internal exploration. The image that came to mind when I was thinking about this lesson was this like old school film, The Journey to the Center of the Earth. There's some sense that you're kind of, putting a little helmet with a torch on it, and you're going into the cave of the inner spaces of your mouth. So hopefully that's an image that works for you guys. And yeah, we're just going to start, I think. So when you're ready, if you just find a comfortable place to sit, and maybe just take a few breaths, just feel your breathing this morning. Morning, Louise. Morning, Simone. Yeah, so as you sit there and as you breathe, maybe you feel, the kind of the degree of ease you feel in your breathing process this morning. You can notice a flow of air through your nose down into your chest. And whether your chest or your abdomen's moving with the breathing. Whether you could feel that all the way down to the pelvic floor. Some sense of the movement of the breath right down in the pelvis. Good. And you feel your feet in contact with the floor, hopefully. And then very gently, just bring your attention to the inside of your mouth. And that's maybe a weird thing to bring your attention to. If you're a Feldenkrais practitioner yourself, maybe you've done this before. But in that internal space of the mouth, obviously the tongue is involved in that process. So what I'd like you to do is just bring your tongue to touch the very top of the upper teeth. So in between the teeth and the gum. So the tip of the tongue is just resting right at the top of the upper teeth. And just feel as you do that, as you make that movement with your tongue to that position, that there's also some activation or some muscular, some movement of the root of the tongue. So anytime you move the tip of the tongue, the root of the tongue is involved. Good. And then very slowly, what I'd like you to do is begin to trace a line backwards along the palate, following the midline, very slowly tracing the tip of the tongue along the midline and back forwards to that point, just at the top of the teeth. And do it very slowly and just explore this line. When I was looking at some of the anatomy for this stuff, one of the guys that I was watching was talking about the way that the palate forms during the embryonic process. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but as we're forming as a baby, there's this kind of wrapping over of the palate. The bones of the palate kind of form during this process, and it creates this midline. And there is actually, I think there's a little tiny bit of skin that kind of that defines this midline. So you may be able to feel that with the tip of your tongue. And as you take your tongue backwards and forwards, again, maybe as you take your tongue backwards, you can feel some distinction between different portions of the mouth as you go backwards. So as you move your tongue backwards, maybe you pass the front of the mouth and you can feel some ridges on the palate, on the upper palate. And as you take the tongue further back, maybe it becomes a bit softer, or smoother, not necessarily softer, but smoother. And then if you really feel like you have a gymnastic ability with your tongue and you go right back, you can feel the point right on the soft palate, this kind of mobile part of the upper palate. And as it goes back into the uvula, which is a small muscular shape at the back of the mouth that you can see if you look down people's throat. And one thing that I think is really important, just vary the speed a few times. So whatever speed you are doing that exploration, slow it right down. Change the speed completely. And notice as you change the speed, does it change what you can pay attention to? If you go slower, for example, can you pick up more detail? And just continue to move it forwards and backwards and just see if you can kind of get a sense of the shape of the upper palate. What shape is it? Good. And then bring your tongue to rest. And then very slowly touch the tip of your tongue to the bottom of the bottom teeth. And then move the tip of your tongue backwards in the lower palate. And you'll get to a point where the kind of the tip of the tongue is touching the root of the tongue. And just kind of, go to that point. And again, there is a defined midline. So you can actually sort of see that there's a defined midline on the bottom of the tongue. And just do that a few times, kind of explore that midline along the bottom palate with the tongue. See how far the tongue goes. And maybe you can feel as you do that, the kind of activation at the root of the tongue. How does it feel? Good. And then rest your tongue again. Just come back to the sense of breathing. Maybe you can feel some of the muscles of the face or the throat. Just see if there's any kind of obvious changes that are taking place through that little exploration. Good. And then when you're ready, just do a few more times, taking the tongue up onto the roof of the mouth, and then just defining that midline again. And notice what's happening with the tongue at the bottom. And as you go further back, as you take the tongue further back, can you feel that there's some muscular activity down in the tongue? So it kind of like pushes out. And if you wanted to, you could have your fingers just underneath your jaw here, and you'll feel that as you take your tongue backwards, this part of the tongue muscle kind of pushes out slightly. Good. Okay. And then rest your tongue, and see if you can get a sense of the depth between the upper palate and the lower palate. So we've just kind of defined the midline. And as you rest your tongue now with your mouth closed, just see, kind of using your attention, using your internal awareness, can you get some sense of what the space is, what the height of the space is between the top of the palate, the top of the upper palate, and the bottom of the lower palate? What's the space involved? And maybe if you want, you can just take the tip of the tongue and touch the upper palate, or you could take the back of the tongue and touch the upper palate, and then you could take the tongue down, the tip of the tongue, touch the lower palate, and the back of the tongue and kind of push down into the lower palate, just to really see if you can define that space. Maybe you notice that as you do that, there's an increase in saliva that's being produced, and I believe that's one of the facial nerve. I think it's the cranial nerve 7. Either that or the trigeminal nerve, I'm not sure. But anyway, so as you stimulate these parts of you, it actually increases saliva production because it's stimulating the nerve that is responsible for that. Good. Okay, and then what I'd like you to do is just bring your tongue as far back as is comfortable on the midline. And then very gently, I'd like you to take your tongue out to the side, to the point where the side of the teeth, the gum and the teeth meet at the side, and then back to the midline. And just do it on one side to start with. So we start with the left side. So you go from the back and you go out to the teeth with the tongue, and then back to the middle. And then you move down a layer and you go out to the teeth and then back to the middle. So it's like you're kind of mapping out that structure or shape of the palate. So we've defined the midline. We've had to think about the depth of the palate, the mouth inside, the space inside the mouth. And now we're really kind of mapping out this arch of the upper palate. So that I'm not sure, I'm not 100% sure of the word root for this, but the palate having some historical connection to the word palace, and that it's kind of got this this kind of dome-shaped aspect to it, and maybe there's some connection between those two words. So as you map down to the side, and then you go layer by layer, kind of coming forwards and feeling how each layer, how each level is a different shape. So as you come more towards the front of the mouth, the palate is a different shape. The shape of the arch is different. And when you get all the way to the front, just go back and do it again. So take your tongue right to the back, the midline at the back, and very gently just kind of begin to go one layer at a time down to the left side and then back up to the midline. Just mapping out the whole kind of left arch from the midline all the way to the front of the teeth. I'll give you time to do that. And as you do that, can you feel your breathing? Could you kind of bring some of your attention to the air coming through your nose? As you bring your tongue to the side and you're kind of mapping out the shape of the upper palate, can you think about the air coming through your nose at the same time? Just very gently, like 20% attention to the breathing. Good. Okay, hopefully you've brought the tongue all the way to the front now. So now what I'd like you to do is move the tongue to the midline again, right at the back of the palate, and then begin to slowly, very slowly map out the right side. And again, I'd encourage you to play with the speed that you were doing it. See if you can slow it down in such a way that, maybe it provides the opportunity for more detail. So the slower we get, the more our attention can be kind of very precise in some way. So taking the tongue from the midline over to the right side, down to the point where the teeth meet the gums, and then back to the midline. And just do it a few times. Go slowly over to the right and then back to the middle. Slowly over to the right, layer by layer, coming forwards and noticing the change in shape of the upper palate. And at the same time, again, bring some of your attention to your breathing as you do that. And think about this flow of air at the same time. So continue to make the movement with the tongue. And then feel this flow of air coming through your nose into the nasal cavity. From the nasal cavity, the air travels through the nasal cavity and down into the throat. So there's actually a kind of a connection between the space of the mouth and the space of the nasal cavity with this passage of air. So as you kind of mapping out this upper palate with the tongue, once you get to the front with the right side, then you can just move back to the midline again and explore the right side again. Can you feel that as you do that, there's some sense of the internal space between the upper palate and the airflow into the nose and the nasal cavity? Again, this is kind of like one of those excavation projects where you're kind of going deep into the earth and then exploring new spaces. So give yourself time to map out the new territory. As you continue to move your tongue and focus on your breathing a little, can you feel that the flow of air kind of contacts the bottom part of the nose and then the inner edge of the nasal cavity, and just see if you can feel the spatial relationship between that and the upper palate. Like, how far away are they from each other? Good. And then let the tongue rest. Continue to feel this kind of flow of air through the nose. As you feel the flow of air through the nose, maybe you can kind of track the passage or the journey that the air goes through the various shapes in the nasal cavity, down into the back of the throat. And is it possible for you to feel, kind of with your mouth and your tongue relaxed, that moment that the air passes back down the back of the mouth? Is that a sensation that you can track? So if you want a kind of a little interesting experiment, if you do have some saliva in your mouth and you just swallow for a second and you notice how it interrupts the flow of air, because there's a more important task happening in that moment, and that's the passing of fluid or food down into the digestive system. And there's this kind of little flap that controls whether it's food or air that's coming down. Good. And then if you can, just block your nose for a second, keep your mouth closed and block your nose, whether it's with your fingers or just kind of holding your nose slightly, and then see if you can kind of push air into the nose or into the mouth. And as you push that air, notice if that has some effect on your ears. So you may feel that there's kind of the increase in pressure in the nasal cavity or in the mouth cavity creates some pressure change in the ears as well. And that's because there's a tube that runs out from back in the sort of the area between the nasal cavity and the mouth and connects to the ears. So for example, if you're on an aeroplane and you're experiencing some pressure in your head because the aeroplane's dropping or ascending, then the thing that you do is you actually chew, because that actually changes the sense of pressure, relieves the pressure through the ears. So again, this is another internal space, one that you can kind of feel through kind of pushing this air in this way. And you can let go of that and continue breathing. The anatomical term for it is the eustachian tube between this area of the mouth and the ears. And maybe as you breathe or as you swallow, you can kind of feel that there's this sense of relationship between these internal spaces. Okay, and then there's one final one to do. So as you breathe in and you feel that flow of the air coming through the nose, feel the flow of the air kind of coming right up into the top of the nasal cavity. And with the eyes closed, have a think about how close the eye socket, the cavity of the eye, is to the nasal cavity. But do it through the sensation of the air. Like as the air kind of comes back into that middle part of the face, and you're kind of following that, you're tracking that air coming into the middle part of your face. What can you sense the kind of the distance between that internal space of the nasal cavity and the internal space of the eye cavity? How far away are they? Good. And then as you continue to breathe, just maybe keep your attention on that very lightly. And what I'd like you to do is just with your eyes, take your eyes over to the left a couple of times, take your eyes over to the right a couple of times. Just do it slowly. But see, as you bring your eyes to the left or you bring your eyes to the right, if you could feel that the eyes kind of come into contact with the outside edge of the eye cavity. Good. And then what I'd like you to do is see if you can kind of make a circular movement looking down from the left over to the right and then down from the right over to the left. See if you can feel the underside of the eye cavity. Again, keep breathing as you do this. Do it very slowly. It's like you're making the movement of your eyes in order to feel the space kind of holding the eyes. Good. Once you've done that a couple of times, bring your eyes over to the left again, and a few times explore the upper edge of the eye socket. So just make this movement over from the left up to the right. So exploring this kind of upper edge of the eye socket. Do it slowly. Don't speed up. And you'll notice if you're speeding up through a change in your breathing, or if you're clenching your jaw. Take your time, there's no rush. If this was part of some, caving exploration, rush could mean that your foot slips and you could injure yourself in a place that, is particularly hard to get out of. So it's good to be kind of careful when we do these internal explorations, careful with our attention. Good. And then let go of that. Let go of that. And very gently, just bring your tongue back to this movement, exploring the internal arch, the cardinal arch, backwards and forwards. Feel that internal space of the mouth. As you're taking the tongue in this movement, feel the bottom of the tongue and the top of the tongue in some form of relationship inside this internal space. Bring your attention softly to your breathing. Feel the flow of air through your nose, through your nasal cavity, down into the back of your throat. Feel that connection between the space of the mouth and the space of the nose and the nasal cavity. Very gently bring your attention to that connection with the ears from those two areas. This kind of internal sort of triangulation of all these three parts of you. The mouth, the nose, and the ears. And then very gently just bring your attention to the eyes sitting in the eye socket. Just kind of feeling that sense of space inside the eye socket. What shape is the eye socket? Is it square? Is it round? How far back does it go? How high is it? Good. And then let all of that go. Take a moment just to kind of feel your breathing, feel your connection with the chair. Make this sort of outward journey. We've done the inward journey and now it's time for the outward journey back into our kind of external environment. So maybe you can kind of wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, very gently begin to kind of wake yourself up, start to open your eyes. And just feel as you sit there, how does your face feel? How does your head feel? And how do you feel in general, the kind of the whole of you? Great. Okay, well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's a really cool lesson. It's one that when I kind of was first starting exploring in the Feldenkrais method, and I came across it, and I was like, "This is the best thing ever." So I hope that comes across in my teaching of it. I would love it if you guys would put some comments down in the comments and just let me know how the lessons were. If there's other things that you're interested in doing, the feedback's really appreciated. So yeah, if you want to access previous lessons or do this one again, you can head over into my Facebook group. There's a link down below if you want to make a small contribution to these lessons via my PayPal account. And this Saturday, I'm going to teach the lesson that I taught yesterday, but the longer version of it. And I think it's a really kind of nice thing to be doing lying down rather than sitting up. So this is this kind of like movement of the lips. So that's Saturday. In my Facebook group, I'll put a link to the event, and that's 1 p.m. UK time on Saturday. Okay, so I will be back tomorrow, and we're going to do this exciting lesson with ears tomorrow. So hopefully you will all tune in for that, and I will see you tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Take care. Bye.